Every time that I've tried to make a working gun in Besiege, I've usually cheated in one way or another. Sometimes I'll use unbreakable mode, sometimes I'll use ropes and logic gates to make the gun work, and for this video, I wanted to try to make the most realistic possible gun in Besiege. Now, to do this, a revolver seemed like a good choice since it's fairly simple compared to other guns, and I wanted to start off by dealing with the bullets. So starting out in the sandbox, the first thing that I wanted to do here was make the most simple bullet that I could. So I built up using some logs here, and you can see I put down a ballast, and behind that, I put down a bomb. Now with this, you can see as I blow up the bomb, it does shoot the ballast forward, but one thing I really didn't like about it was that it dropped very quickly. For this to be like a realistic bullet, I kind of wanted it to fly through the air a lot better, and this just didn't seem great. And a while back, in my sniper build, I ended up putting a couple of propeller blades on the ballasts, and by doing this, you'll notice it flies a lot differently. Now, if you watch here, it does start to shoot the ballast forward, but one problem I saw is that the propeller blades came off almost immediately. This wasn't what I had in mind, so I turned on unbreakable mode just for now, and you can see it's working a lot better. Now, as I go to shoot this forward, you'll notice it travels in a perfectly straight line. This is gonna make the gun a lot more accurate, and you can see this even works going right up into the air. That trail of fire you see behind it is the propeller blades burning though, and this is kind of a big issue. So if I rotate this back down and turn off unbreakable mode, now I needed to find a way to stop the propeller blades from coming off, and I thought about using a couple of grabbers, but they also seem to come off pretty often here, and I realized what I could do is just move the bomb further back. Just by doing this, it was starting to go forward, but the burning propeller blades eventually would fly off, and then you'll notice I just sort of get thrown wherever after that. This obviously isn't ideal, but I got a little sidetracked at this point, and I wanted to try putting some sort of explosive on the front of the bullet. So I put down a grabber, and you can see I put a bomb in front of that. Trying this out though, the bomb in the back would almost always blow it up, and I noticed that if anything was in its explosion radius, it would also set it on fire, which means it's gonna set off the bomb. Now I also tried using a grenade as the explosive, but it also seemed to have some sort of time delay before it went off. And lastly here, I tried out this rocket, but it had the same issue. It'd blow up immediately as soon as the bomb went off. So eventually here, I put this metal spike on the front, and this seemed to work pretty well, but the propeller blades were burning off, and I still needed a solution for that. Now, one thing I was thinking here was using these swords. These are about the same shape as the propellers, and I was hoping they were gonna have similar physics, and trying this out now, it got shot pretty far, but it didn't really seem to spin at all. And I also tried to use some of these surface panels, but these seemed to shear off immediately and were definitely weaker than the propellers were. So it just seemed like a bomb really wasn't a good way to go here if it was gonna set everything on fire. And next, I wanted to try using a grenade. Now I put a bunch of these down here, and you can see trying it out, it did produce some good thrust. With another attempt here, I was even able to start moving forward, but it was clear they were way weaker than the bomb. Now the other thing I had thought of using was the rocket. These are similar to the grenades, and I was hoping they weren't gonna set anything on fire here, and trying it out, it didn't seem to do that. It was still pretty weak though, but now it can actually change the amount of force they produce, and you can see here, I'm getting some results that look a lot like the bomb. And once I had this, I figured I had a pretty good start to making a bullet. To finish it up though, I was gonna need to know roughly how big to make it, and to get an idea of that, I wanted to start to work on the cylinder. Now you can see the way I'm making it here is by making a triangle and then copy this over a few times. The plan is that I'm gonna make a 6-shooter here, and you can see now that hexagon, I roughly have an idea of the spacing I'm looking for. Now here I made something that looks roughly like a circle, and after that, I could start working on the actual casing. So now, once I got that copied over on all sides, it's actually pretty strong, and I'm able to roll this on the ground with pretty much no issues. So I stuck a rocket in the back here, and after that, I also added in a couple of ballasts here that I'll be able to attach that rocket to. The hope with this, of course, is I'll be able to tilt the bullet in any direction without it messing up the angle that it shoots the bullet out at. So with the rocket back in there, I put another bullet in the front of this, and you can see now I'm able to shoot it off, and it seems to work pretty well. It was going down a little bit, but I also haven't locked in the bullet yet, and to do that, you can see I'm adding a little dome in the front, and I can make this out of glass. And this does work well, but I do need some way to set off the rocket, and for that, I was thinking of using a bomb in the back. Now this bomb I can hit to make explode. That's gonna set off the rocket, which will actually push the bullet out without burning the propellers. And with that, the next thing I did here is just paint the whole thing gold, and with that all in place, now I wanted to try to mount it on the cylinder. This of course means I'm gonna need to make some sort of chamber, and for that, you can see I'm trying to use some more surface panels to wrap around it. And with a brace, I was able to mostly hold it in the air. It was pretty weak though, and it almost immediately would just come off. So for something that wasn't gonna break after one shot, I wanted to try using some half pipes, and these did seem to hold it a lot better here, but it also seemed to be a little overcomplicated. Eventually I realized I could just use a bunch of ballast like this, and it seems to hold the bullet just about as well as before while being a lot lighter. So now with that made, you can see me copying this all around the hexagon, and after pretty much no time, I have 6 bullets here. Now I can set off the rockets to fire all of them at once, and it also seemed to work pretty well. So next, I linked these up to a bunch of wheels, and you can see aside for some glass falling down, they do seem to spin around well enough here, and this should allow me to get them up into position. Now the other good thing is if I just try to fire off one bullet, you'll notice it doesn't fire off any of the other ones. This is really good news because it means the bombs are just far apart enough that they shouldn't cause any problems. Now instead of using fire to set off the bombs, I wanted to try using a firing pin. You can see I made this here with a hinge and a log, and this seemed to work fine, but it also managed to blow up the pin. So I changed out the wood for some suspension pieces and also a rotating joint since neither of these will burn. This seemed to work pretty well here, and I was easily able to fire off one of the bullets. And the next thing I wanted to work on was the actual trigger. Now I'm gonna need this for firing, of course, but I'm also gonna need it to load the next bullet into position, so it's pretty important that this actually works well. So the first idea I had was to try to use a gear, and you can see by linking it directly up here, I'm able to rotate it around as I pull up and down on the trigger. This was a good start, but I still needed some way to convert this motion into something that rotates the cylinder 30 degrees every single time. So I simplified the design a little bit, and you can see I also added in another gear here that's going in the same direction as the cylinder. And trying it out now, it does kind of work, but the problem is that when the trigger rotates back forward, it rotates the cylinder also back to where it came from. This sort of direct drive system clearly wasn't gonna do the trick, and I was gonna need some sort of ratchet. So that's exactly what I made here with a bunch of hinges and propellers, and you can see now, as I rotate the trigger forward, it holds onto the back piece, but if I rotate it backward, it's able to spin freely. And giving this a shot now, it did seem to have some promise. I was able to keep the cylinder rotating while also keeping the trigger back, and I was able to disengage it. The issue, of course, though, is I have no way of rotating it exactly 30 degrees, so there's no guarantee the bullet's gonna be in position when I need it to be. So any sort of geared system kinda seemed to be out the window, and instead, you could see here, I started to make this star-like shape, and the hope was that I could make a Geneva mechanism to rotate this 30 degrees for every rotation of the input gear. Now, this sort of was working, but the problem with it was that it was way too inconsistent, and these panels were slipping past each other way too easily. Sometimes they wouldn't even seem to have correct collision at all, and would just go through each other. And at first, I couldn't think of anything else, so I tried to just use logic gates to make this work, and you can see as I pull back the trigger, it does fire it kind of properly, but I just really wasn't happy with this outcome, and I really wanted to try to make some sort of mechanical system to make this all work. So you can see I'm back to my basic design here, and the first thing I did was added in a lot of springs onto the trigger to make it naturally want to push forward. This seemed like a good start, but the other thing I had noticed is that by adding on another gear, there's a lot of slop between these, and seeing this, I didn't think it was going to be precise enough to actually make this mechanism work. This, of course, wasn't giving me a lot of options, but I did have one idea. You can see I moved out this log here, and what I'm doing is making sort of like a channel. Now these logs were way too imprecise though, and what I wanted to try instead was to use some surface panels. Now you can see I made the basic structure of the cylinder here, and once I got those 6 logs in place, now I'm adding in those panels and you can see me stretching them around. Now once I got that bottom piece, I also put down some walls here, and you can see it's fundamentally the same thing as before, but it's gonna be a lot smoother and easy for a pin to ride in. And after that, you can see here, I'm making a shorter panel on the one side and on the other side to both allow the pin to go in and out from. Once I had this basic shape in place, I capped it off in the front, and you can see next I rotated it 60 degrees. Now once I did this, you can see I'm creating another channel here, but this one goes between the 2 separate cylinders. This channel is gonna allow the cylinder to rotate forward, and you can see by curving the whole thing, it ends up looking a lot better. So I went ahead now, and you can see I'm rotating this thing all the way around, so every single cylinder is the same. Now once I had that, I also wanted to put this on some wheels here to let it freely spin. And you can see once I got that all braced up, finally I want to add in that pin I was talking about. Now to do this, I added in a log to the back here, and I'm adding in a lot of sliders to freely move forward and back. And after that, I added in a pin going straight down here, and you can see how it rides in this channel. This is what I was looking for, and my goal was to rotate this over to the side to allow the pin to ride in this other channel, but it seems to be just a little bit too big. Now fortunately here, I am able to make it a little bit smaller, and you can see with this, as it rides in that other channel, I'm able to pull it forward and rotate the entire structure around. Now I decided to paint it gray to make it a little bit easier to see what's going on, but you can see as I try to apply some force to the front here, it slowly rotates it over. It was struggling a little bit, but I decided to finish painting this up, and after that, you'll notice I'm shrinking down the pin, and on the top, I'm adding in a swivel joint. This should reduce the friction a lot, and you can see now as I pull this forward, it rotates the entire structure over exactly 60 degrees. After that, of course, I'm able to pull it back, and you can see now I'm able to rotate it over once again. Now this back and forth motion is directly going to be linked to the trigger, so as I pull it forward and back, it should automatically load up the next bullet. Now to demonstrate this automatically working here, I added in some pistons now, and you can see I'm also changing the geometry a little bit of these paths. This is going to make it automatically settle into better positions, and as I contract and expand these pistons, you can see how it automatically can move over to the next position. And with this looking good, I moved it back over, and you can see I'm linking it up with all of the bullets. This was gonna be a true test here because there's a lot of weight to move around, but fortunately I could expand these pistons out now, and you can see I'm slowly able to rotate this forward. One minor issue I noticed is that the pin does kind of pop out of the socket under this much load, but with a lot more pins, I was hoping this wasn't gonna happen. This actually did seem to solve the problem, and you can see now I'm even able to rotate this around a lot faster. Of course though, I still need to hook this up with the trigger, and to do that, you can see I attached up on one of these hinges. Trying this out though, you'll notice the bottom piece moves a lot more than the top one, and this prevents it from going into place nicely. So I went ahead and braced everything together, and also I added a spring onto the top pin that helps pull it back a little bit. This seemed to keep everything in check a lot better, and you can see now I'm able to rotate this back and actually get another bullet ready to go. So with that at least looking pretty good, the next thing I wanted to work on was the hammer. This is comparatively quite a bit simpler here because all I have is a hinge, and you can see I'm putting down a lot of suspension pieces on it. The reason I'm using suspension is that it's relatively strong, it doesn't really pull apart, and you can see once I get it hooked up to a spring and also to the firing pin, I'm able to pull it back here and actually hit a bomb. Next though, I do need a way to lock it in place, and for that, you'll notice I'm using a couple of hinges here, and on those, I'm putting down propellers. Now the idea is that if I shrink these down the right amount and also use some springs, I'll be able to engage those springs to keep them up like this, but if I pull down the hammer, it'll push them out of the way and then get locked in place by the propeller blades. Now this gives me a way to lock the hammer down in position, but I do need a way to release it, and for that, I'm pulling back these ballasts one more time and using a couple more hinges. These though, I'm adding on some wheels to, and I'm attaching these up to the trigger. Now by using a couple of braces here, as I pull back on the trigger, you'll notice it pushes those propeller blades out of the way, And with this, it's going to allow the hammer to come up and strike the bullet. This was a little hard to get working though, and it got jammed a lot of the time. But finally, with a lot of tweaking, I did get this working most of the time here, and I was able to start shooting some bullets. So with the mechanics of this mostly working, I wanted to try adding on a shell here and making it look a little bit better. Now to start out with this, I wanted to try covering the entire back, and I did have to be a little bit careful at the front. You'll notice these panels are nowhere near any of the bullets, and that's kind of by design. The bombs are gonna shred apart all of these surface panels, and with unbreakable mode off, there's really nothing I could do to stop it. So the plan instead is to make this rough outline around the bullets, and by doing that, it shouldn't let anything explode while still giving the right aesthetic. And with that all done, I also decided to paint everything up. Now, I was pretty happy with the design at this point, so I wanted to try testing this out, and you can see I loaded into the populated sandbox world to try this out. Now, overall, this thing does work here, and you can see that I'm able to load up the next bullet, and it actually goes into the right position. In a lot of these tests, though, you'll notice I'm manually firing off the bullets, and that's because the trigger is a little bit annoying. Locking it in place is kind of tricky, and a lot of the time, it doesn't quite release properly. The problem is that there's just kind of a lot of tension on it, and getting that kind of force without snapping off the trigger isn't exactly easy. Now, the other big issue I was facing is that once bullets explode, you'll notice the casings catch on fire, and if they fall on any of the other paneling pieces, it sets off all of the other bullets. This, of course, isn't ideal, but without being able to build pressure to push the casing out, it kind of makes this hard to work right. But guys, if you have any more ideas for builds like I'm making Besiege, make sure to leave them down in the comments below. And of course, make sure to subscribe if you want to see more content like this. Make sure to like the video if you liked the build, and otherwise, till next time.